The first time Karen tried to annex my land, she did it with a clipboard, a fake smile, and the confidence of a woman who'd never once been told no in public. By the time she was done, she'd called the cops on property she didn't own, opened a live electrical panel she had no business touching, and somehow turned herself into the most hated woman in a 3-county radius. And the really funny part was, this all I wanted was a quiet place in the woods, a little creek, some solar power, and enough peace to hear myself think. I moved onto that land on a damp Monday morning in South Carolina, the kind where the air smells like wet pine needles and red clay, and the clouds hang low like they're listening. My truck crept up the dirt drive with my trailer behind it, rattling over gravel, and I remember feeling that rare kind of calm that only shows up when you know you finally belong somewhere. 2.5 acres paid for clean, tucked just outside a neat little subdivision called Oak Ridge Preserve. Their world ended about 30 yards north of my mailbox. Mine started right where their manicured asphalt gave up and turned honest. Now, I didn't guess that boundary. I verified it 6 different ways. I used county plats, GIS overlays, parcel records, tax sale documentation, GPS markers, all of it. I used to be an Army engineer, so I've got this annoying habit of checking facts before I trust feelings. The facts were simple. My land was not in there. HOA never had been. Never would be. Still standing there that first day, looking at those identical mailboxes lined up like little plastic soldiers, I had a weird feeling in my gut. You know that feeling when a place is technically peaceful, but the peace feels conditional. The first 2 days were perfect. I leveled a pad set, the solar array, checked the septic filter, listened to the creek bubble under the tree line. Birds in the morning, crickets at night, no traffic, no noise, just wind moving through the pines and the occasional metallic clink of my own tools. Then day 3 rolled around, and there was a laminated red notice zip-tied to my gate like I was some kind of escaped zoo animal. Pending HOA violation. Under that, a list: unauthorized dwelling, improper exterior materials, non-standard waste, management system, visual non-compliance. I stood there staring at it, then laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. In the mailbox was a glossy welcome packet from Oak Ridge Preserve, complete with a sticky note telling me to call immediately to register my residency and schedule an inspection. No signature, of course. Tyranny always loves anonymous stationery. I didn't call. I made breakfast, walked my boundary again, printed out my plat map, and stapled it right to the front door. That was me being polite. Around early afternoon, a white Lexus SUV pulled halfway onto my gravel shoulder, and out stepped Karen Roseman, blonde bob, pressed khakis HOA vest tablet in hand expression like she'd been personally appointed by God to defend beige siding. She walked right up to my gate and tapped it with her stylus. "Are you Mr. Taylor Hanks?" I said, "Depends who's asking." "I'm Karen Roseman, president of the Oak Ridge Preserve Homeowners Association. We have several issues to address regarding your presence on this parcel." That wording alone told me everything I needed to know. Not hello, not welcome to the neighborhood. Your presence on this parcel. Like I was mold. I told her calmly that she had the wrong parcel because my land wasn't part of the HOA. She gave me this tiny little laugh, the kind people use when they think they're being patient with an idiot. Then she spun her tablet around and showed me a blurry satellite screenshot with a red circle drawn over my lot. "As you can see," she said, "your structure falls within the Oak Ridge visual domain." I actually blinked. The what? The visual domain. Anything visible from the community must comply with community standards. I said, "That is not how jurisdiction works." She informed me with a straight face that the board had voted to recognize my parcel as part of their expanded community influence zone due to what she called aesthetic cohesion, influence zone. Community standards, visual domain. It was like getting bullied by a scented candle catalog. I asked whether the county had approved this magical annexation. She said, "We haven't filed it with the county yet, but we've corrected the oversight internally." Internally. That was the moment I realized this wasn't confusion. This was entitlement with office supplies. So I told her the truth, nice and simple. "Karen, you don't own this land, your HOA doesn't govern this land, and if you come back on my property without permission, I'm calling the sheriff." Her face tightened. "You don't want to make enemies in this neighborhood, Mr. Hanks." I said, "Then maybe y'all should stop trying to regulate things you don't own." She left, furious, took a picture of my trailer on the way out, and I sat on the cabin steps after she was gone, sipping cold coffee and watching the dust settle. Deep down, I knew it wasn't over. People like Karen don't hear boundaries, they hear challenges. The next morning at exactly 7:11, I woke up to gravel crunching, 2 sheriff's cruisers at my gate. Karen was already there in a neon windbreaker, pointing like she'd just discovered a moonshine bunker. I grabbed my folder, deed plats, zoning certification, GPS overlay, county records, and met the deputies outside. Karen launched right into it. Unauthorized occupancy, unsafe dwelling, community risk, visual violation. The older deputy took my paperwork, read it, handed part of it to his partner, and finally looked at Karen the way a man looks at a barking Roomba. "Ma'am," he said, "this appears to be his land." Karen snapped that it wasn't about ownership, it was about compliance. She told them the HOA had voted. Voted. Like they were Congress with hydrangeas. I said, "By that logic, I'm voting myself king of her driveway." The younger deputy actually laughed. Karen looked like she might combust on the spot. The older deputy told her plain as day that the property wasn't under HOA jurisdiction and that any further interference could become harassment or trespassing. Karen hissed. "This isn't over," then got in her Lexus and fishtailed out like the villain at the end of a made-for-TV movie. Now here's where things got weird. I had drone footage of the whole exchange. I run perimeter flights on my land because tools disappear, strangers wander, and peace is easier to maintain when stupidity knows it might be recorded. Later that day, I clipped together 30 seconds of Karen pointing, ranting, and getting politely corrected by law enforcement, then dropped it into a tiny local group chat where people usually complained about raccoons tipping over recycling bins. By sunset, it had spread everywhere. Facebook groups, local meme pages, neighborhood forums, Reddit threads with titles like HOA Gone Wild. Folks started calling me the sovereign lot guy, which sounded a little dramatic, but I let it ride. Strangers messaged me with their own HOA horror stories. A couple from inside Oak Ridge walked by with a stroller the next day just to tell me Karen once fined them over the wrong shade of beige on their front door. One woman slowed her golf cart long enough to say, "Bless you for standing your ground." Somebody taped a meme to my mailbox of Karen pointing at my gate with the caption, "You shall not live here." I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy that part. Karen, however, did not. A cease and desist letter showed up in my mailbox accusing me of defamation and unlawful distribution of digital media featuring HOA officials without consent. I laughed, then called Audrey Mercer, an attorney I'd known since my military days, sharp as broken glass, lived off-grid in Arizona, and had the rare gift of making idiots pay retail for their arrogance. She reviewed everything and wrote back a response so clean and brutal it should have been framed. In polite legal language, it said the HOA had no authority over my land, no claim over recordings made from my private property, and no standing to demand a thing. In spirit, it said, "Kindly go to hell." We sent it certified. That should have ended it. It didn't. A few days later, Karen came back with 2 other HOA volunteers. One scarecrow-looking guy in a landscaping jacket, and one broad woman in a visor carrying a clipboard like she was about to condemn a shopping mall. They walked onto my property without permission and started planting red flags around my septic field, my rain barrel, my solar inverters. Karen handed me a laminated notice stamped "Condemned" and announced they were conducting an emergency aesthetic safety inspection. I said, "An emergency what?" Before I could finish, Karen marched to my utility panel, flipped the latch, and opened the cover. That changed the temperature instantly. There are moments in life where something stops being absurd and becomes dangerous. That was one of them. I walked over and said, "Close that, right now." She rolled her eyes and told me if I had nothing to hide, I shouldn't fear transparency. So I stepped in, shut the panel myself, locked it, and called the sheriff while looking her dead in the face. "I've got trespassers tampering with live private infrastructure," I said. "On camera." She started backpedaling, then talking about community safety and procedures, but it was too late. Deputy Alvarez arrived, watched the footage, saw the flags, saw the panel tampering, and filed it as unlawful entry and utility interference. He looked around at their laminated signs and muttered, "These people really think they're City Hall." That was the second act right there, the part where the whole thing stopped being Karen versus me and turned into Karen versus reality. Audrey didn't just defend me after that, she counterpunched. Hard. Karen had filed some ridiculous complaint claiming my property fell under visual adjacency governance, which sounds like something a dictator would invent after losing a map. Audrey answered with a motion to dismiss a request for sanctions, a counterclaim for trespass, harassment, infrastructure tampering, and a petition for declaratory judgment. Basically, a court order stating once and for all that Oak Ridge Preserve had zero jurisdiction over my land now or ever. And then came the twist I didn't see coming. Karen's own people started turning on her. Anonymous emails started landing in my inbox from Oak Ridge residents, then from board members themselves. Screenshots leaked from internal chats. One board member wrote, "She's turning this neighborhood into a joke." Another said, "You cannot just invent authority because you don't like what you can see from the cul-de-sac." Somebody sent proof Karen had pushed the board to quietly expand influence to preserve uniformity in property values. That phrase alone told me the whole rotten heart of it. This had never been about safety. It wasn't even about rules. It was about control. That's the thing I learned too late in life. Some people don't care whether something is legal, fair, or true. They care whether they can get away with acting bigger than they are. Give a decent person responsibility, they get careful. Give the wrong person a tiny scrap of power, and suddenly they think they own the horizon. Court day came in October. Karen showed up in a navy pantsuit, dragging two nervous board members behind her like unwilling backup dancers. Audrey came in with binders, drone metadata parcel records, zoning certifications, county statements, GPS, overlays, inspection records, the whole beautiful pile of truth. Karen tried to argue that my solar panels were unauthorized reflective surfaces affecting community aesthetics and that my septic system posed a possible environmental threat. At one point, she even hinted my drone footage was manipulated. Audrey handed over the raw telemetry logs. Then she introduced Oak Ridge's own bylaws and jurisdiction map into evidence. The judge studied them, looked at Karen and said, "According to your own governing documents, your HOA boundary ends roughly 30 yards north of the defendant's property. Is that correct?" Karen froze. Then very quietly she said yes. That was it. That was the crack in the dam. The judge didn't just dismiss her claims. He issued an injunction ordering Oak Ridge Preserve HOA to cease all action regarding my land, referred the utility tampering matter to the county prosecutor, and made it painfully clear that a neighborhood is not a government just because it prints badges and holds meetings with muffins. Karen looked like somebody had unplugged her. The fallout was immediate. Screenshots leaked showing she'd pushed for secret expansion efforts and promised favorable contractor deals to supportive voters. The board removed her as president by unanimous vote. Civil penalties followed, fines for trespass, enforcement, abuse, and tampering. Audrey recovered my legal fees, property damages, and additional compensation on top of that. Last I heard, Karen had to sell her custom golf cart just to start digging out of the hole she made for herself. And me, I went back to my creek, my solar rig, my work. I put up better cameras, added stronger locks, and started helping other folks read their deeds and understand their rights. Not as some crusade, just neighbor to neighbor. Funny thing, once people saw somebody stand up to that kind of nonsense and win, they started finding their own backbone too. A woman came by and told me she'd finally fought a fine over hummingbird feeders. Another man said he challenged a warning about parking too close to his own sidewalk. Small things maybe, but small things are usually where bullies begin. A week later, I hung a sign on my gate. Private property, not HOA, not your business. If confused, ask Karen for the court order. Every now and then somebody slows down, reads it, laughs, and drives on. And sometimes standing out there in the evening with the creek moving low through the trees and the last sunlight catching the edge of the panels, I think about how close I came to just keeping my head down, just cooperating. Just avoiding the headache. That's the trap, I guess. Bad systems survive because decent people get tired. Because peace feels easier than resistance. Because paperwork looks official and confidence sounds like truth if you hear it loud enough. But land doesn't belong to the loudest person. Truth doesn't bend because a committee votes on it. And karma has a funny way of showing up in a courthouse with exhibits, timestamps, and a very patient lawyer. So here's what I want to ask you. When someone abuses a little power to control people, they have no right to control what finally crosses the line. The first warning, the first trespass, or the moment nobody pushes back. And tell me honestly, what would you have done in my place? Stayed quiet to keep the peace, or fought all the way through and made sure the lesson stuck? Drop your take in the comments. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a power-hungry neighbor, or somebody who mistook rules for ownership, tell that story too.